Can we see Jerry? Thank you for joining us today and welcome to Starting Strong in Remote Courses, Cultivating Connection from the First Click. So thanks for playing along with what we're calling the unofficial start. So we'll talk more about the idea behind that a bit later today. So I'm Jen Reniers, and this is my colleague, Sara Fulmer, who you can see on the video there. We're both educational developers from the Office of Teaching and Learning. First, we'd like to acknowledge that the University of Guelph resides on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize that today this gathering place is home to many Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people, and we acknowledge them and we think about our collective responsibility to the land where we learn and work. Next, we'd like to do some quick housekeeping. So feel free to keep your video turned on or off, as is your preference. We do ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're discussing something. And so we've got some Zoom instructions here that you can see for how to mute yourself and unmute, how to use the chat feature. You might also want to rename yourself. So you can see that Sara and I, in our Zoom names, we've added our pronouns. So that's something you can consider doing as well. So I'll leave those instructions up for a moment here. So keep yourself muted, please, unless you're speaking. It just helps with the background noise. We do have some interactive elements in the presentation today, and we'll be putting you into breakout rooms a little later on. Basically, our idea there is that since this whole webinar is about connection and interactivity and connectivity, we thought that it wouldn't be great to just be talking heads at you for an hour. So we want you to have the opportunity to try out some of our suggestions before you put them into practice in your courses. So we will be recording the webinar, but we won't post anything from the breakout rooms or from the group discussions on our website. We'll only post like the pieces where Sara and I are talking. We're aiming to have a Q&A time at the end, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat if something does come up kind of throughout the webinar, and Sara or I will try to respond at the time or kind of let you know that we'll be getting to that later on. Finally, we'll share the slides with all of our resources with you after the webinar has ended. So you don't need to worry about kind of taking notes because we'll share the recording and the slides. So when we think about stepping into a course on the first day of class, if you imagine yourself as a student entering a remote course for the first time. For many students, this experience can be kind of disorienting. So Darby and Lang, in their book, Small Teaching Online, describe the experience of a student stepping into a remote classroom using the metaphor of the empty classroom. They argue that logging into an online course for the first time can feel like walking into an empty classroom with just a pile of course outlines sitting there on the desk. So we want you to think about what it would feel like to be that student logging into your online course for the first time in September. And what would it feel, or sorry, entering an empty classroom for the first time in September with just a pile of syllabi on the desk. If you were that student, how would you feel entering that classroom? So if you can take a moment and either take out your phone or just on another tab on your computer browser and go to menti.com and enter the code 6625572. And there'll be 2 questions that come up. So I'll just leave that there for a minute and then I'm going to switch over to Menti. So how would your students feel walking into an empty classroom? So we've got a few answers coming in: alone, overwhelmed, confused. Yeah, they think, am I in the wrong place? They might feel disconnected. Some students might feel excited. It's sort of an unexpected situation, right? Apprehensive, overwhelmed, unsure what to do. Yeah, this idea of uncertain and nervous and intimidated and confused, these are coming up a lot. And I think I agree. It can be overwhelming enough coming into a new class. But Many students don't have a schema for an online course, right? They don't know what to expect already. They've never really done it before. And similarly, if they walked into an empty classroom, yeah, they wouldn't know what to think. It's strange. They feel disconnected. They might feel angry, a lot of questions, a lot of negative emotions. So now we'd like you to go to the next slide, the next question. Oh, we still got a couple more coming in here. I'm just going to stop the share for a second. And we want you to think about how would you like the students to feel when they walk into your classroom. Okay, so hopefully that question came up for you now. How do you want your students to feel as they enter your classroom for the first time? You can think about that from the perspective of an online course or a face-to-face course. So we've got some answers coming in. We want people to feel comfortable. We want them to feel empowered, welcome, raring to get started, confident, part of a community, enthusiastic. So basically the opposite of how they felt. We don't want them to come in with all these questions, this confusion about, am I in the right place? What's going on? And, where is everybody? We want them to be comfortable, keen, excited, welcomed, ready, part of the community, and supported. So Sarah and I agree that this is how we want your students to feel, and we think that the strategies that we're going to talk about today will help you achieve these emotions in your students. Because when your students are feeling excited, comfortable, safe, that's when they can learn. That's when they can learn best. So I'm just going to come back to our other presentation here. Thank you for participating there. So today in our session, we're going to talk about why it's important to prioritize community, connectedness, and belonging in your courses. And we're going to talk about the importance of doing so right from the beginning of the semester. We'll spend most of the hour, though, focusing on the second half here, the how. How can we engage and encourage and support community, connectedness, and belonging? And the reason why we're talking about before the semester starts and during the first week or two is because research shows that this is the high opportunity zone where you can really engage those students. So many students experience belongingness uncertainty, so they feel like they don't belong in a university classroom. They don't see themselves as a successful university student, and they doubt their abilities. And this feeling of belongingness uncertainty is associated with negative outcomes for academic achievement and for retention. So the period between registration for the course and the second week of class is really when you can change students' feelings of belongingness in your course. So setting up this idea of getting students to connect with you and with the other students in the class, it's not a frivolous thing. It's a really important thing in order for students to feel like they belong, to experience that self-efficacy in their own abilities, and to be able to learn successfully in your courses. Okay, so thinking about your teaching for the upcoming semester, think about the following questions. How will you welcome students? How will you orient students? How will you be present and visible? How will you encourage students to connect with each other? And how will you maintain a sense of community throughout the course? So you don't need to have answers to all of these questions right now. We just want you to think about them for a moment here. And what we'd like you to do now is use the Zoom annotation tool. So what we're trying to do kind of is share a couple different tools that you can use or get your students to use. So to use the annotation tool, if you hover at the top of your screen, you'll see a little box that says View Options. If you click the button below that and click annotate, then this menu will come up with mouse, text, draw, stamp, arrow, erase, format, undo, and redo. If you click on stamp, you'll see a bunch of different stamp options. What we'd like you to try doing here is to read these questions on the left and click a check mark beside the one that you feel the most confident with.
Hey,
And
Jen,
yeah, is it
it
not?
doesn't look like we've been
Oh,
able. So it's not just you, it's all of us. So it doesn't look like we've enabled it. So I'm trying to think of a different way we can do this activity at the moment. I know. So everyone type into chat. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions here. I'd like you to type in the chat numbers 1 through 5. Which one you're most concerned about. So if it's welcoming students, you type a 1. It's orienting them, you type a 2. Just type a number into the chat, which one is most worrisome right now.
so here, our intent was to model what you do when you mess up the technology. No, thank you for that tip, Sarah.
And I call this a chat storm because it's just going crazy in the chat. Awesome, an awesome way to get people to just participate quickly and stay engaged with you. So it looks like we have lots of 5s.
5s, yeah. Maintaining a sense of community throughout the course. Yeah, okay. And
Lots
that
of 5s.
that can be tough, especially in an online course where your typical means of community aren't really there. So we're going to be talking about how to do that a little bit more today. So apologies that the annotate tool didn't work for us. I did try to test that out, but apparently not correctly. So I'm going to switch it over to Sarah now.
Awesome. Thank you. So thanks everyone for staying with us on the fly there. The good thing about Zoom is there's lots of little tools like this to get some active engagement from participants. The bad news is you have to enable some of them before you start the session. So something to add to your list of things to pay attention to if you're teaching with Zoom. So before I get started, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. I know the semester is coming very quickly and you have a lot of things to do. So thank you for spending this time with us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory and the reasons why community and belongingness and connectedness is important. I feel like because you're here, you are already sort of with us on the same page, but I just want to remind us of a couple of key aspects of belongingness and community before we get into the strategies. So I wanted to put this slide up here just to emphasize that holding synchronous meetings, videos are not what builds community and connection. It's really about how we approach our teaching and how we approach our course. So we do have all of these tools at hand and we can use them effectively to facilitate community and our teaching. But we don't have to rely on these tools. It's more about your approach and less about the technology and tools that we have. So I do want to emphasize our perspective on the use of videos in courses. So, in synchronous sessions. So as Jen mentioned at the beginning of our session, it's up to you whether you'd like your video on or off, and that's your decision. And this is an important approach for our students as well. So I've provided on the screen here a number of reasons why students might not want to turn their videos on during a synchronous session. I think for a lot of students, their internet situation might not allow for them to do that. Some students might not want to share their home living environment with their peers or with you. A lot of students might feel quite anxious staring at themselves all day and feeling like other people are staring at them as well. It's also quite distracting. So if you haven't seen your friends in 6 or 8 months and you finally see them all on a Zoom call, but you're also supposed to be looking at the shared screen, you might find yourself just checking out everyone else instead of looking at the shared screen that the instructor is using. So it can actually be distracting to have all of our videos on as well. So I wanted to put up these reasons, but I also want to emphasize that the reasons don't matter. Students should be able to choose whether or not to have their videos on for whatever reasons that might be for, and hopefully we can make them feel comfortable doing so. And keeping them in mind that we are a guest in their homes for at least this semester, and to treat it that way. So I wanted to send out that important reminder before we keep going. So I'm a motivation researcher, and I have been a motivation researcher for quite a while. And belongingness and community is one of the aspects of motivation research that I've focused on. And what we know from research on K-12 settings and university settings is that the feeling of belongingness and community is one of the most important precursors to effective learning. And students who feel a stronger sense of community and belonging in their courses are more motivated and engaged. They're more satisfied with their learning. They participate more, and they're more likely to complete the course and persist through the semester, which is extremely important this fall, especially. And all of those positive outcomes there lead to deeper learning and increased learning. So this study done by Jaggers in 2016 studied a lot of different elements of online courses to figure out which ones would predict increased student performance or student grades at the end of the semester. And because you're in our webinar today, I don't think you'll be surprised by the findings here, that the student-instructor relationship and having an instructor who cared was the strongest predictor of online student performance in this particular study. So that just goes to show us that, you know, we can provide students with a great online course, but if we're not visible and we're not present, it can fall apart for the students. Sorry. Some of you, especially, I see some familiar faces from our course redesign institutes this summer. Some of you might be familiar with this community of inquiry framework as one framework for effective educational experiences. I'll very briefly talk about these three categories of presence in an online course that we can think about. So on the top left is our social presence, which is just being visible and actively engaged in the online course and students knowing that we exist and that we are there. Teaching presence at the bottom is our presence in terms of guiding students' learning throughout the course, so providing instructions, providing learning outcomes so that students can be successful. And our cognitive presence is what we might typically think about in terms of teaching, so teaching the content, helping students engage with us and engage with each other about the specific content of our course. And effective courses we find have instructors utilizing all three types of presence throughout the course. And again, this leads to all sorts of good outcomes for students, including their motivation, but more importantly, their learning in the course as well. So what we want you to think about is what you already do that's working. I think the most important advice that I'm giving throughout this summer to instructors is keep whatever is working. And I'm sure that you all use different strategies already to create community in your courses and help students feel a sense of belonging. So I want you to take a step back and think about that right now. Think about what you already do in your courses that works for creating community and connections with your students. And I'd like you, if you feel comfortable, to share one or two of those strategies in our Google Doc. So Jen is going to pop the link for the Google Doc into the chat box in a minute. And while we're waiting for that, just think about what you already do that works. And if you'd be willing to share one of those strategies or two of those strategies in the Google Doc. So open up the chat box, the link is there. Click on the link, make sure it opens up, and feel free to type in. We've divided it into small courses and large courses. So if your strategy works for both, that's amazing. You can just pop it into one of the categories or both. If your strategy is specific to a small or a large course, then just type it in under the appropriate heading. Here we go. We have all of our anonymous animals working away in the Google Doc. This is great. Okay, so it looks like most folks are wrapping up. As a little side note, I will say that using things like Google Docs is really beneficial when we're working in Zoom, especially if you're using breakout groups. So if you have a large class with a lot of breakout groups, you can't be in every group visiting each of them in the way we do in a face-to-face class when we're walking around. And so if you want to keep tabs on sort of where groups are in terms of their activity, get them to use Google Docs, because then you can check the Google Doc to see where groups are and if they're still typing, so that you know when to close off those breakout rooms. So that's just a little side tip if you're thinking about breakout rooms in Zoom. So I did see a couple of items that I just want to touch on, but this is a great resource now that you all have in your little teaching toolkits moving forward. So there was a lot of focus on getting to know students' names. I know that teaching on Zoom is not our favorite, but one benefit it has is we can see the person's name at all times. So everyone has a name tag on Zoom, and they can change that name to whatever name they prefer. So that is one benefit. We can always use students' names when we're, if they put their hand up to ask a question, it's easy for us to check their name on Zoom. So that's a bonus. Another suggestion was getting to class a little bit early or staying a little bit late. And we suggest this practice in remote teaching as well. So if you are holding synchronous sessions throughout the semester, let students know that you'll be there 10 minutes early or that you'll stay 10 minutes late if they want to chat or ask any questions. So again, like I just said before, keep using those practices that were working for you before. I'll just get Jen to move the slides forward when she's ready. Perfect. Okay, so what we have for you today are 6 key strategies, 3 that you can use before the semester begins or just as the semester begins, and 3 that you can use in the first couple weeks of classes. So these are the first 3 strategies that we will be talking about. The first will be an intro orientation video. The second will be a get to know you student survey to assess what their needs are and concerns are going into the semester. And the third will be making a communication plan. So I will pass this over to Jen to start talking about those first strategies.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So first I'm going to talk about get to know you an introduction and orientation video. So we talked about how we shouldn't necessarily require students to use their videos, and that videos themselves do not create connection. But we also talked about how it's so important for instructors to have that presence, so to be present for their students. And students really, we see from the research, we see from surveys that we've done with the students, they really appreciate having that connection with their instructors. And the best way to do that is to have that introduction video at the beginning of the semester, so that when students do enter that classroom, like we talked about at the beginning, they don't feel that disorientation, like who's even teaching me, you know, is there a real human, is there a real faculty, a real person teaching this course? So these videos can be very brief, maximum of 5 minutes. So the literature shows that students are more likely to engage with videos when they're 6 minutes or less. So you don't want this intro orientation video to be any longer than that. And it can be really informal. So it doesn't need to be highly produced. It's a story. It's you just kind of giving a face to your name, talking to your students about who you are as a person, building that trust, building that connection from the beginning of the course. So the suggestions from the research that we saw are to share a story of vulnerability, failure, or growth, share an interesting fact about yourself. And you're in charge here, right? This is your choice. Whatever you would normally share in a face-to-face course on a first day of class, it's something you could think about sharing in these videos. So the two sort of easiest ways to record your videos are either just using a smartphone. I've even seen examples of people using duct tape to just duct tape the phone to the wall or to a window. You don't need any kind of fancy equipment. Or by starting a Zoom meeting with only yourself in it and using the Zoom record feature like we've done here today. That's a simple way to record a video of yourself. Usually you want to host the video somewhere, so you're not just uploading the file directly to CourseLink, but you're hosting it on an external site such as YouTube. You can select Do Not Index so that the video isn't Googleable, so that people will only be able to access it using the link that you embed onto CourseLink. We do recommend that you caption the video using YouTube's auto captioning, and then all you have to do is go back in and proofread and correct any of the mistakes in the captioning. This just allows your video to be accessible to any students who aren't able to listen with audio, or having difficulties with hearing. And then you would embed your video onto CourseLink. So what could you include in your introduction and orientation video? So you could include what makes the course interesting or special. Who are you outside of your role as an instructor? What's your teaching style? So those are sort of the introductory pieces. And then you could also think about, as a separate video or in your introductory video, those orientation questions as well. So where should students go first? So think about if they're logging into CourseLink, your CourseLink course for the first time, they're walking into your classroom for the first time. Where should they look? Where's the information that they need? Where can they find the syllabus? Where can they find the due dates? Is there a discussion board set up? How are they posting assignments in your course or handing in assignments, things like that? And basically, what can students do to be successful in the course? You could also include information such as how should students address you, different things like that. And we may think that students are millennials or digital natives, that they'll just come in knowing everywhere to click in CourseLink, but that's not necessarily true. CourseLink isn't always intuitive, even for students. So you want to really teach them what they need to be successful. So it's up to you how many of these videos you include. You could include different orientation videos for different areas of the course, or if you're doing different kind of sections of learning outcomes or different modules within the course, you could do an orientation video for each of those modules. But we do encourage you to at least do that introduction video if you're comfortable. And of course, if you have synchronous course meetings, you can introduce yourself synchronously as well without it being a video. But you want to think about the fact that students will be logging in even outside of those synchronous times. So if that first entry into the course is is, not a synchronous time, where are the students going to go? Are they going to have that sense of overwhelm, or are they going to kind of see that video, start there, and feel that excitement like you talked about in the Menti poll? So here, I'm not actually going to play the video because we found that videos tend to lag quite a bit in Zoom. So we recommend that you're actually just embedding videos in your course link site and asking students to watch them later if possible, because with internet connectivity, there can be a lag. But we'll include this link here. There's a gallery of dozens of intro videos, and you'll see that they're all really different. They're, some are longer, some are shorter. This one is just a minute long. The faculty member introduces herself with her name, her title, talks a little bit about the course and what she's excited about, and just kind of really humanizes herself, gets the students excited about the course and who she is as a person and who she is as an instructor. So we just wanted to include that link, but there's a whole gallery of those videos for inspiration. And they're all, none of them are super slick or high tech, like they're all just recorded on Zoom or on Teams or on a smartphone. So you you won't be intimidated by them. And then, yeah, so that's the videos. And then our next recommendation is that you create a get to know you student survey. So I like that almost everyone was, or one of the main suggestions in how we create connection is really by knowing students' names. So we're in online teaching, remote teaching, we want to try and humanize the experience for students. So you've humanized yourself by sharing that video of yourself, of who you are as a person, but you also want to allow the students to share who they are as a person. So what are their expectations for the course? What are their needs? Maybe their challenges, their preferences related to remote learning in your course. So this, what we suggest here that you do is create or adapt a get to know you student survey. It can be very short. You send out a link through your course link. It wouldn't be an anonymous survey. You would want the students' names to be linked with their answers, because you'd be asking them questions about whether they have accessibility needs. Of course, they still need to go through the student accessibility service process in order to access those accommodations, but there may be other accessibility needs they have, like they may even have needs around like I don't have a private space all the time to attend a synchronous course. So there may be things like that that don't meet the level of the student accessibility services kind of form, but they may still want to share that with you. So you could ask them about their ability to engage in synchronous sessions, their pronouns if they'd like to share them, the preferred name, what they're most looking forward to or most anxious about in their course, and then access to reliable internet and technology required for the course. So think about things like, are you asking students to print things off, to take pictures of their work? Are you asking them to watch a lot of videos or things like that? You want to make sure that students are able to do that using the resources that they have at home. So in the notes that we're going to be sending out, we have a link to a good get to know you student survey. And in OTL, we've also designed a get to know you student survey that you can just adapt and use for your course. So if you would like to use our survey, you can just contact otl@uoguelph.ca, OTL. So that's our email address, and just ask to have a copy of the Get to Know You student survey, and we'll share it with you in Qualtrics so that you can just embed the link in your Zoom or in your CourseLink course there. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Sarah now to talk about a communication plan for the semester.
Awesome. I just want to quickly address, Leanne just wrote a question in the chat about students getting frustrated by seeing 5 get to know you surveys where they're asked the same questions over and over. I think if the survey was really long and the data wasn't going to be used, then yes, they would get frustrated. But I think when we're asking students, can you make my synchronous session, like, are you available to come to this synchronous session for the class? Do you have these, pieces of technology that I, think you'll need for my particular class? If you make it really specific to your course and what you think needs to happen in your course in order for students to learn, then I don't think it'll be too frustrating. This really should be a survey that takes them less than 5 minutes. And yeah, perhaps in another case, there might be an opportunity for students to share this information about their, technology challenges, and that goes out to all of their instructors for the year, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think we have to do it on an individual course basis for now, and just tailor the questions for your specific class, keep it short, and then once you have that data, let students know that you've gone through it. These are the changes I'm going to make, or these are the requirements for our course. And this is what I'm going to do for those of you who can't make synchronous sessions, or don't have access to a webcam, or don't have access to a printer, or whatever it might be. So I think responding to that data is an important step as well in students seeing that survey as a meaningful experience. Okay, so I'll move on here to the communication plan for the semester. Some of you are also typing really deep questions into the chat that hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about closer to the end of the session. So I know the chat is filling up, so please, once we get to the Q&A portion of today, if a question that you have hasn't been answered, feel free to type it back in once we have that opportunity to answer your questions more. So I'll move on to talk about making a communication plan for the semester. Online courses are open all the time, which can be great for students, but it means that they might not know the best method to contact you, or when is best to contact you, or when to expect a response. And so I think this is a strategy that's important for our face-to-face courses as well, but it becomes a little bit different in the remote environment. And if we can set up the plan at the beginning of the semester, it'll be a lot more seamless. So in terms of your communication plan for the semester, it's really about being transparent and providing clear expectations to students about where to ask questions, when to expect responses from you, and how any discussion forum areas are monitored by you. Those of us who made this quick switch last semester to remote teaching, it's possible that you just received a ton of emails with students' questions, because maybe we hadn't set up a special space for them to ask their questions. So this is all in hopes of avoiding a ton of emails, unless that's your communication plan and that's what you want. So it's just about being clear with students here about how to communicate with you and with each other. So there's 4 tasks listed there that we should plan for when we're planning for the semester. And really the goal of doing this is just so that students know where to find us and how to best access us, and so that students know that we are there with them while they're learning. I think my tips for this is the first one, to be realistic. So your plan needs to be manageable for you, first and foremost. So in terms of where students should be asking questions, try to limit the number of places, I would say, that they are asking questions, so that you're not flipping through different websites and different channels all the time to try and search for students' questions. Try and keep them contained as best as possible. And be realistic about your turnaround time as well. And the second part is just to be consistent with your expectations for students' communications with you. Virtual office hours is something we've chatted a lot about with faculty over this summer. So I think in terms of virtual office hours, the typical recommendation is using Zoom and those synchronous time slots that you have set aside already for your course, to use those as office hours. You can rebrand them so that students might actually come. If you call them student hours, students might actually understand what they're there for. You can also keep it as office hours, so that's just a suggestion to make it a bit more accessible sounding for students. You might want to be a bit more flexible with your office hours, depending on time of day, adding sessions around before and after key assessments in the course. Also recommending being available for the 10 minutes before class and 10 minutes after class if you are holding synchronous sessions with students. If students are doing group projects, we recommend setting up times to meet with those groups throughout the semester as well to make sure that they stay on track. One awesome tip I came across is if you're holding office hours and you're meeting with students one at a time, and you have students in the waiting room on Zoom waiting to come in and see you, one tip is to send them all into a breakout room to hang out together, just like they would be hanging out outside your office door. This way they can maybe answer each other's questions while they're waiting there, which might reduce the need for you to meet one-on-one with students, with every student who's waiting. And they can just create community and chat with each other in that breakout room while they're waiting to go into your office and meet with you one-on-one. So that's a quick little Zoom trick that can help build community and hopefully get students' questions answered by each other. So those 3 strategies were the before the semester strategies. So we'll move on to the next 3 strategies, which are during the first week or 2. So I'll start by talking about student-student interactions. And my dog just entered, so you might hear Lotus also contributing to the conversation. So for student-student interactions, if you are teaching a large course, something to consider is developing small sub-communities of students that stay the same throughout the entire semester so that students are working more in smaller groups on discussions, on group activities, instead of always trying to work in this larger class structure. So you can set up those groups ahead of the semester and have students break out into those groups, use those groups in discussion forums throughout the semester so that they get to know those in their group. Also creating opportunities for collaboration, so using things like Google Docs to do collaborative course notes or collaborative concept mapping exercises, using short active learning activities like a Think, Pair, Share. And then creating spaces for students to have informal interactions. So on your CourseLink discussion forum, you can have a more casual, informal space for students to talk with each other, like a cafe or lounge area. Students might also find those spaces themselves outside of CourseLink, which they do in our face-to-face courses as well. So I think it's our job to provide space for those, and students may or may not take up that opportunity or find ways to do that on their own. So what we're going to do, Jen, I think we're sort of running short on time and I want to make sure there's time for Q&A. So what I'd love for you all to do actually is if you scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see all the options show up for muting and video and all those things. There's one that says reactions. I would love, if you love icebreakers, I would like you to put a thumbs up. If you don't love icebreakers, don't put anything. So thumbs up if you're a fan of icebreakers yourself. No reaction if you don't like those icebreakers. All right, all right. So we had some thumbs up, but not many. Okay, so I think the general consensus is that we don't like icebreakers. So what I'd like to talk about now is some effective strategies for icebreakers to make them less terrible. How about that? Okay, so there's a lot of different ways we can use icebreakers. So Jen and I at the beginning of this session had you type in your quarantine name. That was an icebreaker, okay? It was pretty low stakes. You could choose whether to do it or not. We didn't, give you points if you did it, although we did make great comments if you did. But it was your choice. And you could also lie if you wanted. If the last thing you ate from your pantry was pasta, but you didn't want to share that, you could type in anything and we wouldn't know, right? So there was lots of choice and flexibility in that icebreaker. It was funny. It sort of set the stage for positive energy. It didn't really help us with content or learning, but it was just an easy way to enter today's webinar. So there's a few different strategies we can accomplish when using icebreakers. So on the screen here are just different types of questions. I won't go through these because we will email these slides out right after the session. So you'll have these in your back pocket. But we can use icebreakers just to create some energy, some positivity, to have a laugh with each other. And we can also use icebreakers to introduce or spark interest in our content as well. So they can be quite purposeful in both directions. In order to make it effective, if you hate the word icebreaker, then don't use it. So there's some other suggestions on the slide here for calling it something else. Make sure you participate. So that's part of the vulnerability that we're emphasizing for this semester. Make sure you're willing to do the icebreaker yourself and participate along with your students. We'll try to avoid asking students about their summer, which is a typical go-to icebreaker for some of us in the fall. I think a lot of us have really struggled this summer, including myself, and it might not be what I want to talk about on the first day of school. So try to steer clear of that particular topic right now. Vary the response type. So the beauty of working in a digital environment using technology is we have images, we have emoticons, we have reactions, we have GIFs or GIFs, we have polls. So you can vary what students are doing when they enter class. And then just like we did today, we let you all in a few minutes early before the webinar and let you do the icebreaker before the session began. So it gives students something to do while they wait as well. I'll pass it back over to Jen.
So yeah, so I'm going to jump back in here. So another recommendation that we came across in our research for this webinar was to create a course charter or a learning pact for your students. And there's lots of examples online. I think we really liked this example by Michelle Pacansky-Brock, who's a faculty member and an educational developer at a college in California. What I like about this pact is that it includes sort of more of the nuts and bolts organizational pieces, but it's mostly focused on what kind of environment the course you will create in the course. So that could be not your style. You could be, more focused on the course policies, but I think it's important to think about both of those pieces there. So treating your students with dignity and respect, actively present in your learning, provide a variety of assignments to ensure your learning needs are met. But you could also include things like, I will do my best to respond to emails within X amount of time if I receive them during, these hours. Another thing I really like about this learning pact is that it has expectations, not just for the students. So sometimes we make kind of ground rules or like a class contract on the first day of class that just talks about what the students will do. But it also actually includes expectations for what the students can expect from you. I think we're going into a semester of somewhat uncharted territory. So putting these things out there at the beginning of the semester can really kind of help the students have an understanding of who you are as an instructor, what they can expect from you, and what you expect from them. And as you can see from this slide, you can adapt this learning pact however you'd like, if you like it. And what Pacansky-Brock recommends that you do is that you actually give a really low proportion of grades to students for reading and sort of digitally signing the pact, just to get them to engage in it to a certain extent. So the way she does that is she posts it on her LMS, her course learning management system, and gets students to either just type in, I agree to the course learning pact, or to type a response to number 8 there. Is there anything else you'd like to add? So to add a suggestion, and then they'll use some synchronous course time to discuss any of those additional suggestions, and she gives students a 1% kind of grade incentive for doing that. So that's, I think, an important way to kind of get the course started and to help kind of set the stage for the type of experience you want to set up in your class. So the last thing we want you to do is think about making a plan for the semester. So we're going to give you these slides as we said, so I think we'll leave the rest of the time for a Q&A, but what we'd like you to do as you go away today is to really take some time to think about how you'll support the belonging and community needs of your students online, and how you'd like to make them feel. So one way you'll do this in face-to-face classes that could be translated to a remote environment, one news strategy you could use in a remote course, and one question that you still have. So think about a plan for the upcoming semester, and I think at this point we'll open up for the last 8 minutes to any questions that you've got. And thank you very much for your participation today and your patience with our couple of little tweaks on the fly. And I see we've got a lot of good questions coming in. Yeah, so put the charter where in the LMS. Yeah, I agree. I think it should be posted on CourseLink. And it's maybe something that you even highlight with an individual, like with a video that you use to highlight the charter, why it's there. You don't want it to kind of just look like paperwork. You want to kind of draw attention to it, maybe spend a few minutes of synchronous time talking about it.
Jen and Sarah, it's Lauren Knopper. Great presentation. I learned a ton. I have one question. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I won't ask them all. One is about the Mentimeter thing that we use. That was great. And I like the way how it made that live Wordle that came up. How on earth does that work? And how do you get that to go into a presentation?
So it's slightly awkward because you might have noticed me switching out from PowerPoint into Mentimeter. So that is the one sort of thing you have to do, but it can be really effective. So it's a free polling software. If you have a free account, you can include 2 questions per presentation. Typically that's pretty good for one course. So you just go to let me just see, mentimeter.com, and you can sign up for a free account. There's lots of different question types. So the question type we had there was called word cloud, but you can also just do a multiple choice question, and then you see like a poll of how many students answered each response option, which can be a great way to quickly see where students, it could be, you know, an actual multiple choice question. You can see where students understanding the content correctly, or where are they getting things wrong, and kind of give you an idea of what to spend more time on. So yeah, we'll include in that slide maybe a little more information about how to set those up. But basically, you just go to mentimeter.com, create your presentation with the questions, and it gives you a code, and then you just give the students the code at the time and to answer the question.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah. So feel free to unmute there if you have any other questions, and we'll try and check the chat as well. Sarah, do you see anything in chat that we should address?
Responding to some of them in the chat about things like your background. I will say there were some chat questions earlier about vulnerability and sort of what's expected or what's okay in terms of vulnerability, and that's a personal choice. I think even the question of what's in your background is showing vulnerabilities. So there was this crazy, I will say, I think it was a Chronicle article a while ago about how you should prepare your Zoom background to look professional. And I think our students are not going to have professional backgrounds, right? They might be in their bedrooms, or they might be in the basement, or who knows where they'll be. And so I think the more we can be just open about it and okay with sharing whatever our background might be, then our students will also feel more comfortable. I did work with some instructors last week too on figuring out how to use the virtual background tool. So I can do that now. I go to my video settings, and there's a virtual background option in my video settings, and boom, I'm now by a lighthouse. So if you or your students don't want to share what's in the background, that is an option for them as well to change it. So just keep those in mind. And also in terms of vulnerability, I think the goal here is just letting students know that we know they're human beings, right? With challenges and stressors. And so if we share some of our own stressors and challenges, that will help them to realize, oh, this person will understand if I need an extension on a deadline, or if I'm not able to make it, or if I can't turn my video on. So it's really about showing them that we're human, so that they can feel comfortable being human as well.
Another interesting question that just came up is Diana says she's got a pet who's a bit louder, a bird. What if she starts talking, thinking that I'm talking to her? So I think maybe share that with your students in your intro video. Maybe introduce your pet if you're comfortable. As you saw, Sarah's dog came in. I have a webinar that's recorded on OTL's website where my 6-year-old son wanders in and starts showing me his Happy Meal toy, which I've never been able to go back and watch because, yeah. So I think it's going to happen to you as instructors. It's going to happen to students, right? It's part of humanizing your teaching. I think it's okay to do what you have to do. If you need to step away for a minute, if there is a crisis with a pet or a child, or you can take a break the way you would in a real class if something like that came up. And probably the easiest way to do that is to let your students know and then mute yourself and turn off your video. So you're not having to relaunch the meeting if it's a synchronous session. You can just kind of step away. The students can't see you, and you just let them know, I'll be back in 5 minutes, and then turn your video and your mic back on when you're ready. Yeah.
I just want to mention too, there's some questions coming in about how do we know if students are engaged? If we allow them to have their videos off, it's hard to teach into a void, as someone mentioned, if everyone's videos are off. So you can encourage students to have a picture or like a emoji of themselves that shows up when they turn off their screen. So you can set that up in your Zoom so that a picture shows up, so that you do at least see something if that's your concern as an instructor. But I will say you do start to get comfortable speaking into black screens as you go. I think even if students do have their cameras on, that doesn't mean they're engaged, right? Just because we can see their faces doesn't mean we know what they're thinking. And the only way we know what they're thinking is if we get them to do something. So I would encourage, if you are teaching synchronously over Zoom, to at least every 10 minutes, if not more frequently, get them to do something, whether it's a poll, whether it's posting something in the chat or a breakout room. That's the only way we can help them to be engaged in what they are learning. And then if you provide those opportunities, I'd say that's your job. And then it's up to students to decide whether they want to take those up. And students will have to make a lot of hard decisions about how to best learn this semester. The one thing to keep in mind is, despite a pandemic, they signed up to learn in your course. They signed up. They want to be there. So I think we allow them to learn in whatever way is best for them. If that's asynchronously, if that's not joining in the synchronous sessions, but they're still learning how they want to learn, then let them be and let them do that. And then it's our job to provide those opportunities for them to engage.
I see that.
We'll pop the last slide up.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Time.
I see that we're almost at the end, so I'll just pass it to Sarah here.
Oh, great. So it is 1:30, so I do want to respect your time, and I have to head back off to the Course Redesign Institute that we're running today. So thank you so much for joining us, really and truly. We know you have a lot going on right now, so thank you for being here. Your students are in great hands because you care about their learning and you care about connection. So take whatever strategies work best for you in your course and run with it. And good luck this semester. You're going to do great. I know you will.